welcome to everybody. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for watching. I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm joined, as you see, with Rabbi Biatch, Jonathan Biatch, a wonderful, wonderful man of faith, and I think you're going to have a good time hearing some of the conversation that happens, and his thoughts, and his insights, and some of his life experience. In just a minute, we'll have Rabbi Biatch introduce himself. But just as we get started, I would like to just introduce myself. My name is Justin Miller. I am a community liaison with the Arizona Interfaith Movement. And so what that means is I'm someone that's trying to connect with the community, connect with faith leaders, city leaders in a way to help build bridges of understanding and just to help one another get to know one another and our stories. And I think that's kind of at the crux of what we're doing here, isn't it, Rabbi?
I am sure it is. More understanding and more information rather than rumor or rather than guessing helps a lot. Yeah.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Rabbi, I think you already know this, but just for our listeners, the mission statement of Arizona Interfaith Movement states as follows: Our mission is to build bridges of understanding, respect, and support among diverse people of faith through education, dialogue, service, and the implementation of the Golden Rule. I guess one of the things that that I have felt recently is that if we can get to know one another, our faith, the core beliefs of our faith, but from people of that faith, people who will speak it, who will share it from their lives, from their experience, and also if we can know something of their faith journey. I think that helps us connect with people that we don't know, connect with faith and religions that we aren't as familiar with. And I think as we get to know people on a more personal level with their own faith, our level of and our ability to have compassion, empathy, and understanding just increases. And so that's really at the heart of what we're doing today. So Rabbi, without any further ado, would you just take a minute? Would you introduce yourself to us, and would you tell us just a little bit about you, your childhood, where you were born, a little bit about your family growing up? Would you mind doing that?
Sure, not at all. I was born in Portland, Oregon, and at the age of 5 months, my family made a move to Los Angeles. And essentially, I grew up in suburban Los Angeles. For
Wow.
a little while, we lived closer to downtown, but then my family moved to the San Fernando Valley, and that was where I essentially grew up. Vast area, similar to the valley that surrounds Phoenix, although I think the Phoenix Valley is much larger than the San Fernando Valley.
Okay.
Um, so I grew up in Judaism. There are many different American movements, many different varieties of Judaism. I was raised in a conservative, with a capital C, conservative congregation with
Okay.
conservative Judaism. And I can explain more later if I need to, but suffice to say that conservative Judaism is a movement which, in its time once, really focused on community. It focused on worship. It focused on bringing people together, not simply around worship, but around a whole bunch of other kinds of activities, whether it's activities for men and women and separately or together, whether it was drama groups, whether it was a local community newspaper, whether it was simply education for education's sake. It was a community. It was a hive of activity, and that was my background.
That's wonderful. I mean, it sounds like you've had a lot of experience connecting with community, neighborhood, family, friends. I mean, it's not just a closed group of individuals that are going to come together on a regular basis in your experience. Is that right? I mean, this is like an outreach of sorts.
Not for worship only. I think it would be one way to say it. There
Oh,
were
just a minute, Rabbi. For some reason, I can't hear you right
oh,
now.
test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Hmm. Oh, I see something is, well, I don't know what that is. That's just a
There you
recording.
go. I can hear you now.
Okay. So it was not for worship only. And it
Yeah.
was for many reasons that we came together. And uh, even though people came from many miles away sometimes, people lived 7 to 10 miles away from the synagogue. I think I lived 3 miles from the synagogue.
Okay.
So it wasn't confined to one geographic neighborhood, but it really was all over this general East Valley in the San Fernando Valley kind
Wow.
of. And some people even lived in the city. So people came from all over. And it was a community of high quality. And just parenthetically, that synagogue has contributed, if you will, or has continues to develop, continues to put forth. Its graduates, its young people have entered many fields of Jewish professional work, whether it's
Wow.
clergy, whether it's community organizations working, whether it's education. A large number of people have gone into Jewish communal work, and it's really gratifying when I think about that. As a place that provided opportunities for young people to learn and to be inspired by the tradition.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, yourself included, right? I mean, you came from that in your studies, and it led you to a life of ministry. Would you mind just telling us a little bit? Can we just kind of segue into that? I think we'll come back to maybe some other personal things about your life and some experiences that you've had. But Rabbi, would you share with us what are some of the core aspects of your faith that you feel are essential for our community to understand? If they think about Judaism, or if they think about if I were to go to a synagogue, like what would that be like? Would you just share with us what are some of the core aspects of your faith that are just really important for us to hear from you?
So I'm going to answer the question by sort of saying that for most people who are Jewish and in an observable way, they would agree with most of these. We have some variation,
Okay.
but I think first is the unity of God. I think that that is a key element in the belief system that we have. That the sixth chapter of Deuteronomy starts out by saying, it's really verse 4. It says, listen, pay attention, Israel. The Adonai, which is the formal name of our God, is our God, and Adonai is one. And
Mm,
from there on, every other tenet of Judaism sort of revolves around the understanding of that unity. Another piece that derives from that is that the only thing that we know about God is that God exists. In other words, many of us look at the Maimonidean understanding of God, and to say that God can be described in a lot of statements that begin with God is not this and God is not that.
mhm,
But the only thing that we know that God is that God exists. And then we move from then on to try and further understand what that might mean. So that's one, the first major tenet I think that would be important to understand. And that corollary that we describe God, not by what God isn't.
mhm,
Um, and we say that God is, but what that also allows us to say is that God may mean different things to different people, depending upon how we experience the world and how we experience the creations.
mm,
So
mhm,
we understand God in different ways. Um, and Maimonides, when he wrote the Guide to the Perplexed, he said that sometimes the Bible uses God or uses anthropomorphic terms for God, but it doesn't mean that God has an outstretched hand and an arm. It doesn't mean that God gets angry. It doesn't mean that God brought miracles by miraculous power.
mm.
We can't say those definitive things about God. And so we try to refrain from doing that. The next thing I think it would be important to know is that you mentioned that the Arizona Interfaith Movement has as one of its core beliefs or concerns is the people subscribe to the Golden Rule. So in the Torah, which is the first third really of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Leviticus, it says, "Love your neighbor as yourself."
Mhm,
And loving your neighbor as yourself is a truly important aspect of what Judaism is all about.
mm,
Sometimes we go and we discuss that tenet in its positively stated way, love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Hillel, who lived in the first century before the Common Era, said it in a different way. Um, but this is something that we subscribe to also. Rabbi Hillel said, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor."
mm.
Um, And one of the reasons we say it with that inflection, with that tone, is because there are some things that we would love in our lives and we'd love to share with our neighbors, but those things may not be good for our neighbors based upon whatever factors are at play. But we
Right.
do know that what's hateful to us, we shouldn't do to anybody.
Mm.
So we be sure not to do them to others.
It's beautiful. That really is beautiful. If someone were to come to synagogue, tell us what they would experience. What types of things should they anticipate? And is that something um, that someone from the community could come in and observe or experience without a full background in Judaism? Tell us just a little bit about that.
Worship at a Jewish synagogue involves many expressions of gratitude. We are very grateful for the world around us. We're very grateful for the many gifts that God places before us for our use, for the many ways that we interact with science and nature and medicine, and we are grateful for all of those opportunities. And so, one of the things that we hear in our worship, for example, first we talk about the gratitude we have for the way the universe works, for the regularity of the sunrise and the sunset and the seasons of the year, and even the heat and the cold that we experience. We're grateful to God for providing all of those elements which have up until now provided us a life that's rich on this planet, or that has rich, it's full of potential, it's rich from potential. Um,
Yeah.
Another thing that we will offer gratitude about is in the liturgy, that is our gratitude for learning and our gratitude for having a book called Torah, that book, which contains all of the legal requirements for Jewish observance, and we're happy for that opportunity to study. Further, we are also grateful for the opportunity for our liberation. The story in the book of Exodus for the liberation of the Israelites is our story. It's our historical narrative. Whether it's historically true or not, I'm going to leave to other experts, but it is our narrative of being enslaved and then being liberated, in many instances, liberating ourselves. And so that means we are offering gratitude for that. And we're also offering gratitude for the opportunity of sharing that with other peoples, meaning our responsibility, our sanction to go and liberate other peoples. And we're thankful for that kind of opportunity as well.
Wow.
There are also prayers for protection, thanking God for divine protection and for protection from friends and neighbors and communities who put their arms about us at times of doubt and times of difficulties. So we're happy for those things as well. Our ancestors, when they wrote our prayer book, they, in their particular world, were very concerned about more tangible moments of gratitude. So they thanked God for rain because rain allowed them to grow crops and to earn a living. They were thankful for knowledge. They were thankful for all kinds of things that affected them individually. We in our day remember those prayers, but we also try and consider what are the things that we're thankful for today. And so we have many expressions of gratitude along the way.
What a beautiful thing. I mean, just to hear all of the different ways in which you have a spirit of gratitude and not just listing, here's my list of 100 things that I'm grateful for, but it sounds like that's just part of the core nature of someone who lives and believes and recognizes Adonai and the liberation, and just it just feels like it would be a rejoicing type of experience to be there in synagogue and to have that experience with one another.
Well, we have a good time, but I think one of the things that we derive from worship is certainly a sense of joy. And whether it's the joy from our ability to thank God for those things, we also express joy in being together in community. Uh,
Yeah.
and we also, toward the end of our worship, every time we worship, we also express joy for the memories we have. And we call to mind people who are deceased, but whose memories still continue to inspire us each day. And that's also a very important part of
Cool.
what we do.
that just resonates deeply within me. I think I think that as I've been around many individuals of a variety of faiths, it's really interesting and fascinating to me to see those individuals who who just have this light and just this joyful countenance. You can see it in their eyes, you can see it in their speech, you can hear it, you can feel it being with them. I think that what a not just a positive way, but what a paradigm shifting way to see life, to see our existence in a way of gratitude and joy. Now, obviously, the past with, I mean, just mentioning, the liberation and what Exodus entails. There's a lot of hardship that comes in your history. There's a lot of hardship and trial, and so. Um, and so maybe could you speak to that for a minute? You also said something that maybe this is kind of this could couple with that question. You said a liberation from ourselves. Now I know that, like, can you just speak to that for a minute? Like what are you referring to when it's not just the Jewish people as a nation being freed, but also ourselves? And can you speak to that? And also, um, maybe let's just start there.
I'll try. It's so much of what so much of what we offer in worship is a matter of communal concern. 99.9% of our worship is spoken for the sake of the community. This is what we ask for ourselves, for our community, for people, for humanity, for the world. And very little of our worship is formally spent on thinking about the individual. But
Hmm.
I think of one prayer, for example, though, that we say on Saturday mornings and other mornings we could as well. And we
Uh-huh.
offer a prayer for our own humility, our own patience, our own strengths that need to come forward, especially when we're lacking them. Not everyone comes to worship in a good state of mind. We all have had different experiences every time between the times we come to worship, and they can affect us in very deep ways. Sometimes they make us happy, and sometimes we are depressed as we come into a congregation hoping for some kind of spark, hoping for some kind of communal connection, or at least a piece of personal connection that is one person connecting to another. Because
Yeah.
even that is enough to lift the spirits of someone. But it's that kind of personal advancement that I think is really important that people try and move toward, even though many of our prayers are said for the sake of many as the first person plural.
Mhm.
I always encourage people to think about what we are getting out of prayer as individuals. What can we take with us to make our worlds better? Because that ultimately makes the greater world better.
Yeah.
If we have a better smile on our face more of the day, that's contagious, and uh, that is given over to other people, and
Mhm.
they too may have better days just based upon an interaction that we may have with them.
Yes.
So um, I think that's part of what you're asking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a few other questions. I'm really the just from some of your comments, I'm kind of anxious to get to. But before I get there, I don't want to go too fast. You mentioned a couple of times the sacred text from which you read and that you utilize in your worship and in synagogue and personally. Can you just for a second describe what is it in Judaism? I mean, many will know, but some may not know. What is it that you would consider sacred text, and that's a core part of your worship experiences personally and in synagogue?
So we begin with what we would call, or what some people might call, what scholars might call the Hebrew Bible. In scholarly settings, it's called the Old Testament, although that is also a term that could be, we don't use that term so much unless we're in a scholarly setting.
Sure.
But the Hebrew Bible consists of three sections, three divisions. And the first division is called Torah. And the word Torah means instruction or teaching. And that's the first five books of the Hebrew Bible, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The second division are the books of the prophets, and these are both prophetic writings and historical writings, although they start with history. It's the book of Joshua, Samuel, Kings, um, and then come the literary prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and then 12 smaller literary prophetic works. And then the third section is called the writings. And in the writings, there are a number of different works that speak to poetry, the Song of Songs. The book of Psalms is included in that collection, Proverbs, the book of Job, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah,
Mm-hmm.
Chronicles, um, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes. Uh,
Yeah.
those are the books of the Hebrew Bible. And they were codified, they were canonized about the year 100 of the Common Era.
Okay.
At that moment, the rabbis living at the time felt that there were so many different new ideas and new religious groups sprouting up in the Middle East that they said for the Jewish community, we need it to be boundaried. And so they set up a commission and they determined that these 24 books would be the books of the Holy Bible. Now, there are other Jewish sacred texts which we today would call the Apocrypha. And these are legendary stories. These are fun stories. There's wisdom stories, all kinds of things in the Apocrypha that we consider holy texts. Other movements consider them holy as well, but
Mm-hmm.
some movements have them differently arrayed, but only in, I mean, and that's their right, whatever.
Uh-huh.
But the Jewish apocrypha may be different from a Catholic or a Protestant apocrypha. So that's just a fact. Uh,
Yeah.
so those are the books that really have a certain sacred status, although the Apocrypha doesn't have a sacred status as the rest of the other part of the Bible.
Yes.
What comes after those books are hundreds of years of rabbinic writings and rabbinic interpretation and glosses on those sacred texts,
Okay.
whereas it's pretty uncertain. Well, it is certain for many as to how the Bible came about. It is absolutely certain how rabbinic texts became how they are. They were written by rabbis, by authorities who are named and who we know something about.
Yeah.
Um, and following those books, there were legends that were written, stories that were written, homiletic works, really, which
Yeah.
which explicate the stories of Torah, but
Mm-hmm.
in parables and in story fashion to enable the reader to really understand a little bit more what the characters of the Bible might have been going through, what their motivations were, based upon interpretations. And these are clearly interpretive works, so they're not authoritative in terms of fact. We identify those collections as midrash. The word midrash sort of has the meaning of studying, delving, interpreting,
Oh.
searching.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understood that that work is a matter of searching for answers rather than giving definitive answers.
Beautiful.
There's a lot of other texts that follow. I think I'll stop. That's probably enough.
Well, that's wonderful though, and I think that's very helpful to understand a little bit about those sacred books, those sacred texts, and also kind of just a hint at kind of how they came about and how they were canonized in that way. Rabbi Jonathan, I would love to know just a little bit more about you and to hear a little bit about your story, knowing some of this backdrop about Judaism and about the faith and tradition of one who might be Jewish. Where did this begin for you? Have you always felt this way? Have you always felt devoted and kind of called in some ways, or have you always had this feeling of being so connected as you are? Like, where did this begin for you? What's your story like?
As I mentioned, one of the primary aspects of the synagogue where I grew up was the need to be involved in community. And in my particular case, and the way my parents set up our education, was that I was in my synagogue probably 4 days a week.
Wow.
In addition to public education, I went to public schools in Los Angeles. So those, when I say 4 days a week, I'm talking 2 weekday afternoons a week, perhaps Saturday and then Sunday morning for education as well.
Wow.
Um, so I was in the synagogue quite a bit. And I can't say that I had a dedicated feeling about becoming a rabbi until relatively later in my life. But I can certainly offer that my connection to the Jewish community was very important to me. And
Yeah.
that's where I spent a good amount of my time, whether I was in class, whether I was um, singing from the pulpit of my congregation, which I did quite regularly, whether it was taking my first trip to Israel at age 15 and
Wow.
trying to understand what Israel was about a long time ago. And since then, taking many, many, many trips back to Israel, back and forth, and
Wow.
learning more each time I go. Um, so I had inside of me this Jewish feeling, this Jewish drive. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure I realized how strong it was until until I entered college.
Okay.
And in college, I majored in radio, television, broadcast management. And indeed, I thought that that was going to be my career.
Wonderful.
I was working in a TV production house in Hollywood. Um, and during my senior year, I had gotten that internship and I thought it was great. And so I thought this is where I'd like to be when you, uh, not maybe not for everyone, certainly, but when you grow up in the greater LA area,
Hmm.
uh, entertainment, for the entertainment world and broadcast world, that's local information, that's local news, those are local concerns. And I had a great amount of sensitivity about that. But when I graduated college, I went to Israel for a year. And I did that because I had never lived away from home at all. During college, I lived at home. And so I said, I need to break away. I need to begin to individuate. And so I did. And I found a program that first gave me a wonderful facility for speaking everyday Hebrew. So my
Wow.
Hebrew increased, 1,000%. And then
Hmm.
I also found a job working in television in Israel. And I was working as a production assistant in a production house in Tel Aviv.
Wow.
And when I came back from the year program, I said, I think I'm going to aim myself toward the Jewish communal field because I think I have some skills there. After being in graduate school for 2 years, I worked for Jewish community organizations that work in the secular Jewish community.
Yeah.
That was not satisfying, actually, ultimately. So I decided to stop working and consider rather becoming a rabbi because I
Wow.
felt that being a rabbi, I would be better able to give whatever talents I had over to people around me. Um, and I found that to be quite true. And I found that to be really satisfying. And so for the last 35 years, I've been working as a congregational rabbi, um, as opposed to being in education or anything like that. And
Yeah.
whatever the rhythm of congregational life, that's the rhythm I'm in now.
That's amazing. What a story. And I think that's especially amazing that, that you took that time intentionally to be away from home, to figure some things out and to just immerse in the culture and the language and over in Israel. And um some of the things that I hear in you, as you mentioned, working even just in the secular field of the Jewish community just wasn't as fulfilling. Can you can you tell us just a little bit more? What is it like to serve as a rabbi? And what are some of the things that motivate, that encourage you from within in your service as a rabbi? I mean, this is a deeper call. This is a deeper level of commitment and devotion. It's very, from what I understand, it's very thorough all year long. I mean, this is not. It doesn't seem like you can take a whole lot of vacations from your service and from this ministry. So what is it that just drives you and causes you to have such devotion for these 35 years that you've done this?
I think it's worth to say that whenever I go away on vacation, that I always get at least one or two calls from my leadership. I'm never on vacation, really. Um, but I think that um, Serving in this capacity, you work in matters of faith and religion and practice.
Mm-hmm.
You work in pastoral issues, meaning you need to be ready at a moment's notice to go to the hospital to
Yeah.
visit someone who's been admitted, or to be by the sickbed of someone in their home, or to welcome someone in my office who may want to come in and counsel about
Yeah.
something. And so there's a major pastoral aspect as well as the religious aspect. I have found also in each of my pulpits the need to be involved with the local community on interfaith matters, on
Mm-hmm.
intergroup matters, and as many matters as we have to deal with, whether it's matters dealing with sexual orientation or gender selection or gender orientation, or
Mm-hmm.
we deal with prejudice reduction, or
Yeah.
we have dealt in the past with um, rescuing Soviet Jewry in the mid 1970s to mid 1980s was a major, major effort
Wow.
for our
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
Or today, when we try to impress our public officials at every level, that sometimes their behavior needs to be matched against religious criteria or
Mm.
the criteria of morality, even. Forget about religious specifically, but just
Sure.
issues of morality
Right.
rather than their own selfish whims. Um,
Mm.
all of that is involved in the work that I do. And all of it happens every day in varying amounts, of course. Some days here are devoted only to students, and some days are only devoted to interfaith work, and some days are only devoted to writing a cogent sermon that I may give that Friday evening to my
Mm-hmm.
congregation. So
Wow.
it's a varied experience, but
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. It sounds like that you have, I mean, that there's not a whole lot of days that are the same, especially that with the pastoral care that takes in as a rabbi or as a faith leader. In my experience, that is certainly an on call, like you said, and needing to be ready at a moment's notice to give service and care and to help strengthen and bolster individuals who might feel weak or vulnerable or just that are struggling. Um, Speaking of that, there's been plenty of times when those of the Jewish faith have had some very difficult times in society, even more as recent. And I would just like to know from your personal life, how do you face how do you face tribulation? How do you face if it's persecution or um, how do you face the difficult things of life, Rabbi, with the joy and the gratitude that you have? How do you personally do that? I mean, I think you've learned some lessons in your 35 years, but what do you do whenever you're faced with just opposition all around you, especially if it's pointed towards you or towards your faith tradition? How do you endure, overcome, and face those types of obstacles?
I think first there's a great amount of hope and optimism that we contain. Hope and optimism has to start from the inside
Mm,
and really continue to bolster us even when things look bad. Another thing then that we do is that we act. Being stuck in one place, being paralyzed,
mm-hmm.
is not the way to approach a problem.
Right.
And one may not act before, however, but one must also take counsel with people around them, people who have similar experiences or similar concerns, or people who I believe will be allies on some level. I think one of the things that does paralyze us is the fear that we're alone in whatever fight we have. And
Mm,
when we come to the knowledge that there are others around us who will support us, who will be there with us as we move forward, that helps that burden tremendously. So we know we are no longer alone.
beautiful.
And that's really important. And then you just have to act. You just have to find what's the right way to move forward, doing so with others around you so that if you are successful, you have with whom to celebrate. And if you're not successful, you have with whom to console
Yeah.
because you need that as well. If you have to acknowledge that something didn't go right, and then you say to yourself, okay, how do we make it better? Doing that alone is much more difficult than doing it with a group of people with similar goals and objectives.
Wow. That is amazing. I truly, truly love that. And I feel that that is such a core part of maybe what might be missing in some of our aspects of how we live in our day, the connection with one another, to go through hardship, but also to go through successes together, to rejoice and also to mourn together, to discuss goals and to figure out how we're going to overcome. I love that you are so also focused on it's not just, I mean, we can recognize the trials and the hardships, the times of burden and difficulty, but we don't stay there. We do something about it. We act and we figure out how to move forward. I think such is the history also of the Jewish people. Is that right? I mean, talk about adversity and difficulty but yet this endurance and this ability to persevere and overcome and to find joy and rejoicing. I think that that's just remarkable. Just
Even in
remarkable.
the face, thank you. Yeah, even in the face of pogroms, even in the face of persecutions, even in the face of, um, royal leaders or other sovereigns who had the ability to crush the Jewish community. Apparently, the Jewish communities all over the world, most of the time, found a way that they could move forward to work even with a hostile government, but to move
Yeah.
forward to say, look, we're here.
Yeah.
That's not an assertive statement, that's simply a fact.
Mhm.
How can we best serve our mutual interests?
That's
And,
wonderful.
and, and even at a time when we had to keep our heads down, um, with a few exceptions, it was just our ability to have resilience and move
Yes.
through a situation rather than give up and disappear.
Oh, that's remarkable. In fact, I would like to ask you, we have a few more questions here, but I would like to ask you, just as we just pause on that, Rabbi Jonathan, what's a either a writing from Torah, or if it's some of the examples a little bit later, if it's just what's something from your sacred text that you hold as just a special piece of scripture that helps, especially in those difficult times, that you have found that has been crucial for those who come to synagogue or those that you have in pastoral care. Is there an example that you turn to in sacred text that you would be okay sharing with us?
Of course, I'm going to share with you a text or a thought from a book which is called Avot. The book of Avot is from the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is like the first level commentary
Okay,
of Torah.
perfect.
So there are four brief statements in the fourth chapter of Avot, but I think those are the things that really motivate me. An authority of the Torah, sorry, an authority among the rabbis, whose name was Ben Zoma, the son of Zoma, whoever that is, asked the rhetorical questions. First, he said, "Who is wise?" And he answers, "The wise people are they that learn from everyone." Then he says, "Who is mighty?" And the answer is, "They that subdue their own evil inclination."
Hmm.
Who is rich? The people who are satisfied with what they have. And then the last question is, who is the one to be honored? And the one to be honored is the one that honors others.
Hmm.
And I think that those are statements of selflessness. Those are statements of really understanding that we don't have all the control in the world that we might like to have of our own situation, of our own lives.
Hmm.
And we have to maintain the humility that sometimes we just have to be satisfied with what we have. That doesn't mean we can't strive for more, but it means we can't be overly envious of people who have more or who have better abilities than we do.
Hmm.
And it really talks about aligning yourself internally first
Yes.
before turning outward.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you. And I think it's wonderful to see how how quickly you can recall and think about those sacred texts. And I think that that's a lesson for all of us as well. To think about those things which can guide us, can give us understanding, and that can help us really become our very best in this world that we live in, but also in our personal lives and our families and our homes. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Um, I'd like to ask you, there's a lot of youth around the world that have just I mean, the world that they live in is much different from whenever I myself was a youth. And um, Rabbi, what's a piece of advice or counsel that you would have for the rising generation as they go about their day, as they go about their lives? Imagine you just had a synagogue of just 20, 40, 50, maybe even just five youth that were there, and they said, "What would you share with me that would help me navigate the complex yet wonderfully potential world that I live in?" What would you say?
I first would talk about the Talmud, actually. And the reason I would talk about the Talmud is that when one reads the Talmud, which is a work written about Jewish law, how to effectuate Jewish teachings, and it was written between the second century and the sixth century after the Common Era, into the Common Era.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that when you read that book, you find, and it's a very large collection, very large. There are only three laws where the text says, after all the discussion of all the laws, and that's what those works are. They're basically rabbinic discussions. Well, what do we do in this case? What do we do in that case? These rabbis say that, these rabbis say that. Only three times does the Talmud say, therefore, the law is blank, whatever the law is.
Okay.
All the other rulings are left to us to infer what the ruling ought to be based upon the discussion that we hear. And the discussion we hear is multiple voices saying different things at different eras and different times. Again,
Yeah.
the books were written over 300 or so years, 350 years. And during that time, attitudes change,
Mm.
ideas change, even certain authorities may change their mind. And I would say to young people today, if we understand that that was one dynamic of learning and transmitting information from one generation to another, let
Mhm.
your lives include that as well. So that if you're on social media,
Mhm.
don't listen to one source of social media. Get in a whole plethora of ideas and do a reading across platforms. Um,
Yeah.
Take in so much different information, and then you will begin to weigh it yourself and find a good answer for you for whatever question you're looking for the answer for.
Wow.
Um, don't be closed and don't be narrow vision in terms of things that you take in. Again, if we're talking to today's youth,
Yes.
there's social media can be so potently a
Oh,
wonderful tool, and it can be a very difficult experience as well. So.
yeah. That's great counsel. That's fantastic counsel. I think that that would be very enlightening, even for a generation that's a little bit older than the youth. Is that right?
Could be.
Just to
That is very true. That is very true.
look at it, study it. And I think that that's really fascinating that only three times in the Talmud that there's going to be a therefore statement that's going to kind of draw some definitive things. And I think that that's significant. I think that's really significant. And if I look back on my life, there are a few therefore moments and a few therefore statements and principles that I hold very sacred and dear to me, but it has come with a variety of experiences. If you were just to give me the therefores, it would kind of cheat the experience of actually learning it in my heart and learning it deep down. And so that's wonderful. Well, we're kind of going to be coming up on a close here. I think I just have two more questions for you. First of all, thank you again for your time, for your generosity, and your just your experience that you're so willing to share with us. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful.
It's been a pleasure talking. Thank you, Justin. Yeah.
So as we kind of get ready to close, I would like to ask you, as far as a religious leader is concerned, some people might. Now I'm not asking you to just share everything about you personally, but sometimes someone might look at someone like a rabbi and say, "Man, they've got it figured out. They've just got this figured out, and I can never be like Rabbi Jonathan. I just like how can I attain to the understanding and the ideas and the wisdom and just he seems settled. He seems confident in what he understands and knows, and he must live a perfect life. And like, there's a lot of things from the outside that someone might view about a religious leader. Um, what would you share with people who struggle to with that idea of comparing to someone who's in your position? They'll never be like you in their mind, is what they say. What would you share with them that you've learned along the path of refining, the path of growth, the path of progression? What would you share?
I would share a couple things, not necessarily in this order, but I think I would say, first of all, have patience to learn. Have patience to understand that the world is much bigger than I am, much bigger than you are as a person, and any one of us is, and involves so many different people with so many ideas that to be heard in the marketplace of ideas may not be so important as to take in and to listen to those ideas and try to grow internally. Another thing is to try to experience within the boundaries of personal safety, experience a lot of the things that there are to experience in the world. Um, I mean, I don't jump out of planes with a parachute, and I don't play tackle football, so
Hmm.
I don't need to.
Hmm.
But I am married. I have owned four houses. I have two adult children. I have a spouse with whom I love and whom I share my life. And so all of those experiences are risky in terms of how they might affect an individual. I've held five different rabbinic jobs in my life. I've had multiple other kinds of part-time jobs. And I think that every one of those experiences is a chance to learn if we are at first willing to listen. Um,
Yeah.
in my graduate work, we did something, I did basically group work, but one of the educational components was a social work ethos, which says begin where the client is. And if you can understand your situation, if you understand where people are in their lives around you, get to know them, and in a way, don't stifle your own creativity, but be
Yeah.
open to listening. Be
Yeah.
open to get to know those people around you. Let them know that you're an open person. Let them know you as well. And let them understand that you have a heart. And then you can begin to interact with them. Then you can begin to see how you change the world around you, even in a small environment.
Yeah.
Just listen.
That is so good. That is so good. My mind has gone to a lot of personal life applications of the things that you're saying, and there's a lot of ways to hear this. And I hope that our listeners, I hope that those who are watching are seeing the rich lessons, the wonderful paradigm through which you see life and our opportunity to grow and to become and to affect the world around us. And I guess that leads me to my final question. As you know, at Arizona Interfaith Movement, we strive to build bridges of understanding and to connect people with one another. We hope that as we learn about one another's stories, that we can grow relationships with other communities of faith, other groups who might be different from us, so that we can serve alongside each other, so we can actually engage in the community around us in ways that are impactful to families and to individuals. So, so I guess the last question that I think I'd like to have you share some thoughts to conclude is what would be your counsel and your advice in the year 2025 as we look at everything that's around, and I think it's going to have a lot of connection to the things that you've said. But what's something that you would like to leave us with, personally, just some of those personal sentiments or feelings, or just things that are on your heart that you would have us just consider as we close today, Rabbi?
So I think life is a matter of balancing personal needs versus communal needs. And sometimes one takes precedence over the other. It doesn't need to be exactly half. And whatever proportion we assign personal needs and communal needs, it doesn't need to maintain itself at those proportional limits in any one day. Sometimes more is required of us, sometimes less is required of us. So first of all, make sure that those boundaries are flexible. And
Yeah.
secondly, and the last part really is do it with other people. Never pull into your shell, never be alone, because I don't think that God intends us to be alone. That says that in the book of Genesis, humanity was not designed to be as one person alone. So
Yeah.
there are always people, there are always causes around you to connect to. Find that cause and be part of it.
Oh. Rabbi Jonathan, thank you. Thank you for just being you. Thank you for being a great example of someone who's willing to talk and to share and to help us understand what you hold sacred and what you hold dear and what you've devoted your life to. That's really important and special for us. I hope anyone who's been listening and those who are a part of this, who are watching, I hope that you can walk away from this experience seeing the joy, seeing the gratitude, seeing the perspective of Rabbi Biatch in the sense of how do we work together? How do we not go through this journey alone? How do we have a communal experience? How can I do something in my life and not just stay in the problems that I'm in? And how can I move forward? There's so much to learn here, so much to unpack. And Rabbi Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I hope that your synagogue continues to be blessed with you there and your family as well. And we look forward to further conversations. Thank you so much.
Justin, thank you for allowing me to be with you today. I appreciated your questioning and the sensitivity and the expertise that you bring. Thank you. Have a
Thank
wonderful day ahead.
Thank you. You too.